This lecture is on the characteristics of early Greek civilization. So we will begin with Greek geography. You'll notice we tend to do this whenever we talk about civilization, we talk about the geography, and that's because the geography often significantly impacts the development of a civilization. And one reason Greece, I think, is so important is because it's different from a lot of other civilizations, and now those differences have ramifications for today. Greek geography, for example, I think is key to why Greece developed democracy, which, of course, is one of the dominant systems of government today. So Greece is different from other major civilizations in a large part because of its geography. So what is it about its geography that makes it different? Well, first of all, Greece has a lot of mountains. It is hard to build a civilization along mountains. Mountains are not particularly fertile. They make it hard to unify an entire area. So Greece is, in a sense, going to be divided by a lot of mountains. There are also very few large rivers. We've tried to emphasize in this class how rivers are very important for civilizations. Civilizations tend to grow up along large rivers. But there's no kind of equivalent to China's Yellow River or to the Indus Valley River or to the Nile in Greece. But Greece does have one very, very important aspect to it. Because Greece is an archipelago and a peninsula kind of wrapped up together. A peninsula, of course, is a place surrounded on three sides by water. An archipelago is a series of islands. Greece had a bunch of good harbors and has a bunch of good harbors. So while there might be mountains and very few large rivers, you do have a lot of good harbors. So this is going to make for more of a seafaring people. So what are the implications of all this? Greece is similar more to India than it is to China, and it's going to have little political unity. Greece will be instead divided into many small city-states, what are called poli, or a single one is called a polis. Right? So there's going to be lots and lots of different different city-states. Do not think of Greece as an empire. There will be an attempt by the Athenians later to establish an empire. But Greece, think of not as a single state. Think of it as a culture. Think of it as a civilization. So there's lots of little small city-states because it's difficult to bring political unity when you've got people separated by mountains and you don't have a single large river around which to build unity and to move quickly and so forth. But you are going to have a great deal of cultural unity. And we'll talk about the various aspects of culture that link the Greeks together in this section, but we'll do that a little bit later. There's a great deal of cultural unity, and you kind of think about it like this. It's hard to lead an army over a mountain and conquer your neighbors. It's hard to unite a country where every little bit is divided by mountains, but it's not difficult to share culture across a mountain. You can walk across a mountain to go to the next town or to, say, go to the Olympic Games. That's relatively easy. So there's going to be a great deal of cultural unity. And because Greece is so good for shipping, because there's all those nice, good harbors, it'll be very easy for Greeks to immigrate and spread their culture. Right? So as you can see in this map, they're going to be spreading their culture here into Anatolia, modern-day Turkey. This will also be territory the the Persians want. The Greeks will also establish colonies in North Africa, in Italy, all over the place. And because there's a limit to the fertility of Greek land because of all the mountains, the population will go up, and then Greek people will say, hey, there's a lot of people here. We need to have some people leave, some people need to immigrate, and people will go over and immigrate. Sometimes, this is something that people decide, hey, we've got too much people. Other times it's just people looking for opportunity, looking for new land, looking for, like I said, opportunities. But it's going to be easy for Greeks to develop a unified culture and to spread that culture around. So we're going to look at several aspects of Greek cultural unity. And the first one is literature. So one thing I want to stress is literature contributes to a sense of shared identity. So you can kind of think about it this way. When you meet someone, right? So let's say you're a freshman and you come to Lander and you don't really know a lot of people and you want to make friends. What's one of the first things you may ask someone is, well, what do you read? Or what do you watch on Netflix? Or what TV shows do you like? Or something like that. And if you find out they like the same shows, you probably feel closer to them. Because usually when we like something, it shows that we share a similar worldview. Right? I, for example, love The Lord of the Rings, think it's a great book. And I find that other people who like it, they have ideas about heroism, about virtue that are similar to my own. So literature contributes to a sense of shared identity. And this can be written literature, but here I'm kind of talking broadly like movies and things like that. Music is a good example, right? You listen to music because you like the message. And when you meet people who also like that music, then you feel closer to them. And this is why people get offended if you don't like the music they like, because, in a sense, they feel that it's something that represents them and their beliefs. So these shared values connect people together, right? Literature can connect people through shared values, through the shared worldview represented in that literature. Now, in really ancient Greece, before they developed writing, their literature was oral. And in pre-literate societies that have not yet developed writing, oral literature is very important. And one of the key aspects of oral literature is poetry. Poetry, and one thing I want to stress, we often think of poetry as something that's kind of for elite people, really smart people or educated people. But in traditional societies, a lot of times poetry was more like music. It was something that was recited in a group. It wasn't something you would sit and read alone. It was meant to be spoken. And one thing that made poetry so important was it was the perfect way to have like an epic, to tell us a big story that gave a worldview, because it was relatively easy to memorize. Poetry can rhyme. It has rhythm. And it's just like, it's much easier to memorize a song lyrics than a paragraph from a history books because of the rhyme, because of the rhythm and so forth. So in ancient Greece, they often focused on poems, right? And it's important, it's very hard to memorize a novel, but it's relatively easy to memorize a poem, even if it's the same length of a novel because of the rhythm and the rhyme and so forth. And of course, the most famous poet in Greece was someone named Homer, right? The blind poet. And he is known for, and there's debates about whether he really existed or where he authored anything. For our purposes, he is the author of two major works. One is the Iliad, which was around the 12th century BC. And the Iliad is about this battle over the most beautiful woman in the world, Helen, between the Trojans and the Greeks. And even though in a sense you might think this is a love story because it's a battle over a woman, it's not really like that. Helen's kind of treated like a piece of property. Her character's not really developed other than the fact that, hey, she's beautiful, you want her. Rather, the focus is on the warriors, the battles. And it shows us how these early Greeks were very much a military culture. Right? The Iliad is, even though it's about, in a sense, the most beautiful woman in the world, is really a celebration of warrior values. And that tells us something about the Greeks. And because this poem reflects these values, it became very popular and helped unify the Greeks. Now, to give you a deeper sense of the values of the Greeks, right? I don't want to just say it was a warrior culture, because warrior cultures can be diverse. In this literature, in the Iliad, there's a character named Odysseus. And that's kind of a modern representation of Odysseus. And Odysseus is a warrior. In the Iliad, he's kind of a minor character. He does two big things. One is he kills a bunch of enemy who are asleep. He and his buddies manage to sneak into the Trojan camp, and they kill a lot of sleeping warriors. And this is considered heroic. Doesn't seem very heroic to me, but it was considered heroic. There is another episode where there is a kind of like the Greeks are mutinying. The Greek army is like, we're tired of fighting this war. We've been here for like 10 years and we want to go home. And one of the leaders of the mutiny gets up and says like, we need to get out of here. We need to stop. We need to leave this place. And Odysseus goes up to the guy, takes a mace and hits him in the face with it. And the guy shuts up, and then the rebellion stops. That's basically what Odysseus does in the Iliad. It doesn't strike me as particularly heroic. I guess stopping a mutiny is kind of important, but this isn't what I think of when I think of heroism. He gets, though, his own book, or his own epic poem called the Odyssey, which is all about him trying to get home. Right? It's all about him trying to get from the city of Troy back to Greece. And he's the hero, ? Why do I say question mark? Well, he's really arrogant. And I won't go into detail about this, but he gets his own men killed because of his arrogance. So a lot of people get killed because of Odysseus, because he's a really arrogant guy. He wants to show off. And that gets his men killed. He cheats on his wife a lot. Like all the time. And he doesn't even feel remarkably bad about it. Like it's just not a big deal. He's just, wow. He cheats on his wife a lot. And what should have been a short voyage that would have taken a few weeks takes like a decade. And then he returns home, kills the men who were trying to convince his wife that they should give up on Odysseus. He must be dead by now because he's taken so long to get home. And then he rescues his wife and son. That's kind of the one heroic thing he does, though there's this kind of, you can see the patriarchy because he has lots of affairs. His wife, and no one complains, his wife, though, her big thing is she refuses to marry another man and is completely loyal to Odysseus. And then he goes and kills the guys who are trying to court his wife, even though they were just trying to do basically what he had been doing. But in any case, that's probably anachronistic. The key point is, in many ways, this guy to us doesn't seem that heroic. But he was to the Greeks, right? He was to the Greeks. What was important was his skill and cunning allowed him to win. Ultimately, that is what was important. So when you think warrior culture with Greece, don't think of like chivalry. Don't think of people who would say, oh, I would never attack a sleeping enemy, or I would never attack in an ambush because that would be wrong. No, the Greeks will totally do this stuff because what's important is winning. Skill and cunning is important. That's why Odysseus is a hero, because he wins. So Greek literature is something that exposes these shared values, these military values of the Greeks. Another aspect of cultural unity is the Olympics. Right? The Olympics were sporting events in which any man could take part. You could have a peasant can wrestle a king, and the peasant could win, and that was fine. Right? In other places, for example, sporting events were rigged. Like the high status person was never supposed to lose. Or in some places, like the home team always won, the visitors always lost, or sometimes it was reversed. Like it would be bad manners to beat your guest, so you would let the guest win. In any case, the Greeks didn't care about any of that stuff. They wanted to win. And they didn't care what status you were. They wanted excellence. And they believed that anyone, in a sense, could be excellent. Or at least any man. Or at least any Greek man. You always have to add those. But like I said, a peasant could wrestle a king and win. And instead of being punished, or instead of rigging it so the king would win, the peasant could win. They participated in these Olympics naked. There was a lack of uniforms. And I have to say that in part just to explain the statue here. But also, again, the idea is to show your excellence. You have a very athletic physique, show it off. The Greeks thought the Persians were weird because they wore a lot of clothing, right? And if you look at Greek representational art, they're naked a lot of the time. And they just are like, you got it, you might as well flaunt it. Don't be ashamed of your body. You are tough. You're a Greek. One thing I should point out was that the sports were related to military action. This is where you can see the warrior culture. A lot of the sports, for example, wrestling obviously has military connections. Running emphasizes building up your stamina. Throwing a javelin, that's really obvious. So a lot of times, and this is important to think about, a lot of times sports are training for military. And typically societies that emphasize sports also tend to emphasize the importance of the military. And the Greeks were very interested in military values. One thing that's fascinating also about the Greeks is what you won, right? So if you win the Olympics, you know what you get? You get an olive wreath. That's what you get. And fame. So the Greeks weren't always guided by a desire for wealth. For the Greeks, oftentimes what was central was fame among your fellow Greeks. And the Persians tell a story about how the Persians and the Greeks fought a battle, and the Persian king asked the Greeks why they had so few people at the battle, and they said, well, the Olympics are going on, so not a whole lot of people showed up for the battle. And the Persian emperor is like, well, okay, what do you win if you go to the Olympics? And the Greeks are like, you get an olive wreath. And one of the Persian generals is like, oh my gosh, these Greeks, Look at how noble they are, that they're so interested in fame, not in material goods. In any case, the Greeks were interested in fame. They were interested in being excellent, showing that skill, and having others recognize it. But what's key also we have to think about is that by bringing people together around a shared activity, they help build cultural unity. Greeks from all over Greece, didn't matter what polis they were from, would come here and participate in these games and talk to each other and learn about each other and see each other as fellow Greeks. And this built a sense of cultural unity. And you can kind of think about it again today. In the United States, if you're a lot of times, if you don't know someone, just like we said, people will talk about what they watch on TV or what they read. Another thing people will talk about is like, oh, what sports teams do you like? Or, hey, did you see the game last night? And that's often a way for people to talk, to get to know each other. And that shows a kind of cultural unity in the United States. But again, I want to emphasize that the shared values here are this idea in particular that skill brings victory. We should be skillful. But also this idea that any Greek man is able to become excellent and should pursue excellence. So there's a notion of equality. I know that sounds weird because I emphasize any Greek man, but it's equality within a particular group. So it's not our idea of equality perhaps, but it is something broader than what we might see in other societies. The peasant can be just as good as a king when it comes to wrestling, and that's something we should respect. The last aspect of cultural unity I need to emphasize is the Oracle of Delphi. It's kind of the religion. So first of all, the Greeks shared a lot of religious ideas. And I don't want to talk about all the religious ideas they shared because that would take a long time. But I do want to emphasize, in particular, their belief in the Oracle of Delphi. It's going to come up a lot. But Delphi is a place in Greece where there was a temple. And it was dedicated to Apollo. And in the temple, there was like this crack in the earth where some gas would come out of the earth. And women, priestesses, the oracles, an oracle is someone who tells the future, would sleep here, and then these gases would give them really weird dreams or would kind of drug them and they would just talk. And sometimes what they said almost sounded like gibberish or it would be a lot of nonsensical words, and a priest would then interpret this. So you would go to the Oracle of Delphi if you had a question or if you had a problem and you wanted to ask the gods for help. You want to say to the gods, okay, what do I do? And some of these questions were very practical. One example is a man going to the Oracle of Delphi and saying, what profession should my son follow in? Basically, what job should my son do? How can I help him to get the job? And the Oracle would then would go into a trance or whatever, would give this woman would give the answer to the question, and then a priest would interpret it, and you get your answer and you would leave. And Greeks from all over Greece would come here. And this shared belief was very powerful. And as we'll talk about, the way the oracle would answer could impact wars, could impact politics. And such was the power of this belief that Greeks shared, that it would shape history. But we'll talk more about that later, especially when we get into the Persian Wars.